the Solo Coach Podcast.
Howdy folks, and welcome to this week's instalment of the Solo Coach Podcast. So thank you very much for being here again. I've received some lovely feedback for the show from some friends and colleagues and clients at the moment, and it really means the world to me. So that people are listening and getting some value and then sharing that feedback with me. So keep it coming and let me know if there's anything I can do to improve, or if there's anything you'd like me to talk about and address in particular, such as a question or something you've heard and you'd like clarification about. I'd love to address that either in the form of another episode or in a face-to-face or Zoom conversation or telephone call, if you like the old-fashioned ways like I do. But this week's episode, I'm sharing with you the value of working backwards, or alternatively known as working from the outside in, or starting at the end to get back to the beginning. So why might I be talking about that? What's the value, you ask? Great question. These 5 methods that I'm going to share today for applying this principle of working backwards are really useful if you're facing a big decision and you're trying to make the best decision for yourself, the most informed decision, or if you are facing and trying to overcome a problem and you're at loggerheads with a challenge or a problem you're facing and you want to overcome it, to figure out how to get through it or past it, fix it, make it work. Or alternatively, you could be coming up with a business strategy, as I was last week, thinking what's the right things to do in what order for me to achieve what I want to achieve. So some of what I'm about to discuss with you was really helpful for me, and so let's get started. No further delays. So number 1, as coaches we talk a lot about values, and number 1 is define your values by defining what frustrates you the most. So what do I mean by a value? A value is, our values are what matter to us the most. They're really useful for informing our decision-making process, and they're especially useful when you start to identify values conflicts. So that's when 2 things that are really important to you directly conflict, and you can end up, you've got what you want or what you thought you wanted, but you're feeling really fulfilled and as though something's missing. I've been in this position lots of times. 9 times out of 10 it's because of a values conflict. So what do I mean by defining what frustrates you the most? So I'll give you an example of my own core values. So the things that frustrate me most in the world are conflict, cruelty, unfairness and inequality, dishonesty, loneliness and isolation, and lack of freedom and lack of stability are something that I find really frustrating and difficult to face and handle. So the opposites of those are peace, kindness, fairness, equality, honesty, and respect, community, freedom and stability / security. So I appreciate I've just spouted loads of words at you there, but by looking through that list of things that frustrate me the most in the world, and therefore the list of opposites, straight away I've got a list of what I therefore care about the most and what's most important to me, and instantly I can see some potential room for conflicts, as on there I've got freedom and also security / stability. So I am someone who is seeking a sense of freedom and adventure, wrapped kind of within the frame of some stability and security, some consistency, some routine. So I appreciate that sounds really hypocritical, but just by having that knowledge, I've realised that when I was in a position where I was in a full-time job with a fixed salary and a very regimented life that was in some ways quite repetitive and monotonous from day to day, I was really frustrated. And was craving that sense of freedom. So when I moved into a life that was completely the opposite, which was being a solo traveller backpacker in some hostel for £4 a night in Vietnam, I was equally frustrated, but for a different reason. I'm pulling my hair out thinking, God, this is the opposite of what I had before. But why am I still frustrated? Why have I still got this sense that something's missing and something's lacking? And it turned out that was because what I had there was a values conflict. I really valued and cared about freedom and adventure and exploration, which is what I had when I was on the road. That sense of I can get up today and do whatever I want and go wherever I want. But then inside I had that niggling feeling of that craving for some stability, some consistency, some security, like a home, a base, knowing that I'm working towards something greater than me, knowing that I'm growing and developing. Personal development's really important to me, funnily enough. And it's only now that I realise that in this life that I've created for myself where I'm running a business, I have this sense of adventure and exploration. There's a lot of unknowns. There's loads of room for spontaneity. No 2 days are the same. Sometimes that can be really daunting. And at the same time, there's a sense of structure there. I have a base that I'm based currently in Chapel Allerton in North Leeds. I have an alarm that goes off at the same time every morning. I have a routine. There's a lot of areas of my life that are quite consistent now in a way that they weren't when I was travelling. And then there's a lot of areas of my life that are really freeing and, unfixed, for want of a better word, which are, again, different to when I was in a full-time job. So with this knowledge of these values conflicts, these clashes between things that matter to me, I was able to start to create this life that ticks multiple boxes, gives me a sense of freedom and adventure, as well as a sense of security and stability. So it's kind of a mix of both. So I really recommend defining your values. When someone says to you, what are your values? What are your core values? What matter to you the most? If you're finding yourself with a blank page thinking, my family, money, I don't know. I totally get it. I've been there before myself, and what I'd recommend is, it sounds really negative, but it can be really helpful to write a list of things that absolutely frustrate you in the context of the wider world, and then maybe in the context of your work, and perhaps in the context of your relationships as well. Because the opposite of the things that frustrate you will be the things that matter to you the most, and the things to focus on and aim for. So I really recommend that. Number 2 is, if you want to figure out how to get somewhere. So I had a client recently who came in saying, I don't know where to start. I don't know what the first step's going to be, and I know what I want to get in the long term, and I know where I want to be eventually. That's obvious. But I don't know when to take the first step. And we were stuck on that. When's the day? Where's the specific day on the calendar that we're going to do the first thing, put the wheels in motion and start to execute the plan? So what I said was, let's start at the end and work backwards. So let's put ourselves into the day where we've completed what we want to achieve. We have set up the new business. It's working really well. We've got a team of 5 people working for us. We are dipping in and steering the ship, but the business is operating independently of us, and we're able to have a very freeing, liberating lifestyle with a good income, for example. Let's start there, and let's literally put ourselves in that position as though that is today, that is now, and let's try and work backwards based on, well, what happened kind of yesterday in order for us to get to today. Well, maybe yesterday or let's say last week or last month, I recruited the 5th and final person into my business. Well, what did that feel like? It felt fantastic, and they're a great fit, and they are in charge of marketing and sales. So what happened before that? before that, I'd got a fantastic person working for me in the finance and accounting space who was doing all my books. And that was kind of 6 months before, and they got their feet under the table. And by then trying to plot out on a timeline, in effect, what order these things happened and a rough date that they happened on, and trying to work backwards, it can end up, and should end up, that you'll reach the present day, and then it'll be more obvious, if not 100% clear, it will be clearer what your first step is going to be. And then by working with a coach as a thinking partner, they might ask questions such as, how long do you foresee it taking from advertising for a position, recruiting them, and then them getting up to speed and being able to fulfill that position effectively? And you might say, well, that should be 4 to 6 months. So then you can build your timescales based on how long that task might take. And obviously this sounds a little bit vague because I'm basing it on a theoretical, but it has worked in coaching sessions, and it can work for projects as well. When you're stuck trying to focus on how do I start, where do I start, when do I start, by starting with the end in mind and having a conversation based on, well, what's the very last thing I need to do, what will be the final step on that ladder, and kind of working backwards, might shed some light on the situation and make it a little more obvious when and how to take the first step, whatever the first step is. So the value of working backwards, we had number 1, which was define your values by defining what frustrates you the most. Number 2 is start at the end and work backwards. So number 3 I've called problemless problem solving. Stick with me. I recently read a book a couple of years ago called Solution Focused Problem Solving, and it blew my mind, and I've never forgotten it, because it spoke about problem solving starting with, or typically, classic model of problem solving is we all get our heads around the table, we put all of our effort, time, resources, energy into working out every last little detail of the problem. We get so close to the problem that all we can see is the problem because we're trying to figure out how to solve the problem. Makes sense, right? Well, kind of. An alternative approach that the book Solution Focused Problem Solving suggests is zoom out a little bit and focus outside of the problem. So say we've got an intermittent issue that's cropping up in like an IT department or system. When is the problem not a problem? So when does the problem not exist? Or what, and how come? So what has to happen in order for the problem to not occur if the problem is an error or a failure of a process? If it doesn't fail absolutely every single time, when it doesn't fail, when you manage to get that customer via a different route, or you manage to achieve what you want to achieve, and the problem doesn't rear its ugly head, how come that's happening? When is that happening? And why? So let's focus on the success criteria rather than the failure criteria. So in order for the problem to not occur, let's focus on when the problem's not present. Equally, another question, when was there a time before this problem existed? It's a great question in coaching. So you've come in and you've got this problem, you're finding out that you've realised that your outgoings exceed your incomings and you're having some serious financial concerns. Was there a time before this was the case? How long ago was that? What was it like? And what's changed since then to now? And if you woke up in the morning and miraculously the problem had completely gone, didn't exist, no traces of it whatsoever, as though it had all just been a nightmare, how would you know? How would you feel? What would be happening? And how would you know that the problem had completely gone away? Because what we're trying to get at here is the problem the root cause? Is the problem is the problem just a symptom of something deeper down, something else that's going on in an iceberg model? Is it the bit popping up above the water, but then below that there's a really kind of mean looking, ominous piece of ice in pitch black waters that's hidden down there below the waterline, that's actually containing the real problem? There's a helpful activity that is a coaching activity I was trained in that I found useful. I've used it with clients and I've had it used with me as well. It's called the multiple perspectives activity. So when we have a problem, say with another individual, a colleague at work, it can be useful to sit as though we're opposite to that person. So you've got an empty seat and you're sitting looking at them, looking at the seat where this other person sat, and your coach might ask you, what are you thinking, what are you feeling, and what would you like to say to this person? I think, well, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling at my wit's end, and I want to tell them, why are you doing this? Why are you behaving like this? This is doing my head in. You don't realise what it's doing to me. You don't realise how you're making me feel. Okay. And then your coach might ask you to stand up from your chair and move into the other chair, to literally sit in the other chair as though you are that other person and look back at yourself and embody being that other person. And the question will come again. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? And what would you like to say back to yourself? Well, I'm thinking and feeling really frustrated. And I'd say back to myself, well, you don't understand what it's like to be me. And it's not just all about you, and there's some more going on that you're not aware of. And I can't share that with you now, but there's more to it than meets the eye. It's not as simple as you think it is. And I'm not just doing this to spite you and make your life a living hell. I am actually, it's coming across like that, but that's not my intention. And then a third position that I might ask you to move into is to come up out of that seat and to stand back and look at the two chairs where yourself was sat and the other person. I might ask you again, what are you thinking, what are you feeling, what would you like to say to these two people? Now you are an observer, like a local observer in the same room. I'm thinking, okay, there's two very fired up people here. Maybe emotion is running high, and nerves and fear, anxiety is running thick and fast into this room, and maybe we all just need to calm down, take a chill pill, and see this for what it is, see this conflict for what it is, because there's more going on here. And what would you like to say to these people? Well, guys, is it time that we see past our differences? Is there another way we can talk about this and face this challenge? We both acknowledge that we're both struggling for different reasons. We've both got constraints on us and pressures on us from all angles. So what can we do if we were to put our differences aside for a moment, put our heads together and try and be constructive and leave emotion and feelings and what's happened in the past to get us to this point, being at loggerheads? How can we sort of put our differences aside for a moment and try and see what's going on from each other's perspectives? And then third and finally, I might get you to step again at sort of another step back, as though you're completely outside of the room, and what we call a cosmic observer, which is someone who's observing from a further distance. They can see the person, the two people in the two chairs. They can also see the observer, and they're looking from above, kind of like from outer space, the cosmic observer. Again, what are you thinking and what are you feeling? What's coming up for you now, and what would you like to say to these three people in this room? And you might have some further thoughts on what you feel might be going on and what might be at play here, and perhaps something you'd not noticed when you were right in the middle of frustration, just playing yourself, playing the role of yourself. Now you've taken a step back 3 times you've taken a step back into the other person's shoes, into the shoes of an observer, and then into the shoes of a cosmic observer, you may find, what I tend to find when I'm the client doing this activity, is that something comes up for me and I feel a bit of a separation from the initial emotions that were doing my head in, and I start to see more clearly and have an inkling or an idea that there's something else going on, and I may or may not know what that is, but I always have a positive action I can take away to find out more about what's going on and start to resolve this issue, rather than it just festering and continuing on and on and on in a never-ending cycle. So this is what I call problemless problem solving. It's acknowledging that the problem is there, and it's trying to sort of park the problem and say, well, let's look at this from the outside in. Let's see if we can look at this from a different perspective and come at it in a different way. Because perhaps the problem is just a symptom of a greater issue that's somewhere else. And perhaps there's more going on that I hadn't considered initially in my initial frustration. You know, when we get all in our heads and emotions are running thick and fast, I'm totally guilty of this, it can be hard to separate the facts and the reality from emotions and frustration, fear, nervousness, anxiety, anger, all the rest of it. So that was number 3 in my 5 ways to use the principle of working backwards / working from the outside in. The next one, number 4, is a brainstorming activity. Now, I heard about this on a podcast, the Jay Alderton podcast, recently, and I kind of stumbled into it a couple of weeks before, completely accidentally. So I was trying to brainstorm what to do about a business strategy, how to decide, trying to come up with a plan for what I was going to focus on and how I was going to do it and in what order and what my priorities were going to be. And I decided to make this whiteboard at 11 o'clock at night with the title of what I would do if I wasn't holding back. Meaning, what would I go out there and do tomorrow if kind of success was guaranteed, if there's no way I could fail, and there's no way that I could make a fool of myself, embarrass myself, or tarnish whatever reputation I think I've got, tarnish that. So I made this sort of this mind map on a whiteboard and found it really quite easy. And then the very final step was I changed the wording in the middle from what I would do if I wasn't holding back to what I will do, without holding back. So what had become a brainstorm of things that I might do if the sky's the limit, and as though success was guaranteed, that then became, that formulated a structure of a plan for what I'm actually going to do, and I'm in the process of doing it, especially doing with what I'm doing with you right here, right now, is part of my plan of things I'm going to do without holding back. And Jay Alderton's development on this, which I went and did a couple of weeks later, which was equally interesting, was get a piece of paper or a whiteboard and draw in the middle a cloud, and in the cloud write, how can I ensure that I fail? How can I ensure that I fail? And mind map, in terms of the area that you're working on, so for me it was my business, I drew this mind map of things that I'd have to do to ensure that I fail to make this business a success. So posting inconsistent, irrelevant, random, AI-generated nonsense on social media occasionally, all hours of the day, with no consistency and no theme, completely off-brand, off-topic nonsense. I could do that now. Another thing was taking loads of days off, maybe even taking weeks off at a time and not showing up. Another one was spending all my time, like every hour of every day, going to business networking events but never doing any coaching. And my other one was, giving my product away for free and / or being happy with the current clients I've got and not looking for any more clients and not growing the business. So working inside the business but not working on it at all. And then inevitably when I eventually finish working with those clients, there will be no more clients, there will be no more business. So that would be an absolutely brilliant way for me to ensure my failure. So it sounds really morbid and really negative, but it was quite fun. And the final step, which I'm sure you've already guessed, was I changed that brainstorm title from how can I ensure that I fail to how can I ensure my success? And I went round every item on the board and flipped it. So if I can ensure failure by posting irrelevant nonsense at all hours of the day with no theme, therefore I can ensure success by posting relevant, valuable, on topic, on theme content on social media on a regular schedule, so that people actually want to read it and want to follow it and want to comment on it, and it adds something to their life and it doesn't just get in their way and annoy them. Similarly, spending some of my time at business networking events and some of my time coaching, some of my time in new spaces that I haven't been in yet. So splitting my time so that I'm working equally on my business as well as in my business. And charging a fair amount for my coaching so that I'm not giving it away and ending up in loads of debt, but I'm equally not charging £1 million for a session and getting no clients. So finding that balance. And that also ties back into my values there at the beginning, making sure that, my fairness value and equality value, making sure that they're respected and that I honour them by ensuring that my pricing is fair and that I treat my clients fairly and equally, and that I won't go too far into it, but making sure that it aligns with my values and being aware of where there's potential values conflicts and where I might potentially trip myself up. But without going from 4 back to 1, we'll continue going because I feel like we're on a roll now. So the value of working backwards, the fifth and final area that I'd like to share with you today is the value of the reframe. So in coaching, we like to talk about reframing things, and my coach Russell is fantastic at this. And one of his reframes that he taught me a long time ago was, instead of calling them difficult conversations, which almost makes them difficult before they've even happened, what can we do to ensure that the difficult conversation is actually a quality conversation? So it's not being naive to the fact that it's probably going to be a difficult conversation, but it's framing it and calling it something different so that we're not spending the next 2 weeks planning and ruminating and focusing on what's going to be a really difficult conversation, because then it might end up becoming exactly that. It might become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we might make it in our heads, we might make it up to being a lot worse than it is by catastrophizing how difficult that difficult conversation is going to be by giving it a different name, a different label of a quality conversation. So a similar one I like is failures are results, in effect. When we fail at something, we've taken an action and we've got a result. Therefore, the chances are, if we take the same action again, we might, if we do what we did before in exactly the same way, chances are we're probably going to get the same result. But if we change our approach a little bit, if we tweak our action, if we tweak our kind of input action, our output might be a different result, which may not be failure, it may then become success. And I heard literally a statistic today that 50% of marketing works, and the trick is finding which 50% of all that you do in the marketing space actually works and doing more of it. And it's not, the statistic wasn't 50% of the marketing that you will do will fail. No, the statistic was 50% of marketing works. So it was focusing on the positive, the potential that half the things I do in my marketing strategy for my new business will actually fail. Will be successful, rather than versus just facing rather than focusing on the fact that 50% will fail, it's the same thing. I'm aware that I'm saying the same thing, just in two different, kind of dressing it up in two different kind of guises, using different terminology. So another one that I like is my single biggest failure, which I could look back on and say was when I dropped out of university. It was actually my single biggest lesson, and it didn't break me, it made me. So it was a defining moment in my life where I decided to leave university as a 19-year-old guy and pursue what I really wanted to do in life, which at that point was an IT apprenticeship. And not only did it turn out to be the right decision, what I learned on that critical moment in my life was that my life is my own, and it's up to me to charter my own course and follow my own path, follow my heart. And because it's me who's going to make the bed, and it's me who's going to have to lie in it. So I might as well make a bed that I want to lie in, right? Then I could look back on that and I could drag this story around with me like a black cloud for the rest of my life, saying, I'm a failure, I failed and I dropped out, and I'm this and I'm that and I'm the other, and be really deflated. But it won't serve me. And in reality, doing what I did and dropping out of university paved the way for the success that I later had in my IT career and the success that I'm having now. And it created the life that I'm living now. It created me as I am. So I choose not to regret it, and I choose not to look back on it as a failure. I choose to look back on it as a massive learning opportunity and a massive win in many ways, because every cloud has a silver lining, and that one had many. And as before, as usual, I'm going to throw a number 6 bonus one in there of, in terms of the value of working backwards. If you have been asked, what do you want in this future job? You're going to change jobs, and what do you want out of it? And you're trying to work out, well, what do I want? Or indeed, I'm single and I want to find a new partner, so what characteristics do I want them to have? What do I want them to be like? How do I want them to behave? It can be really difficult to write down a list of wants and requirements. You can typically write, in my opinion, in my experience, 3 to 5 things, and then start to get lost. And it can be a lot easier to actually start by writing a list or brainstorming everything you don't want. I don't want inflexibility in my new job. I don't want loads of stress and pressure. I don't want a really horrible culture. I don't want, to be part of a huge entity where there's so many people working there that I don't know the majority of the people working there, and I feel like a very small cog in a very big gear, a very big machine. You could make a list of all the things you don't want. I don't want to be working 40 hours a week in one single grotty little office. I don't want to drive 3 hours to work every day. I don't want a super long commute. I don't want to have to work overtime. I don't want to have to work weekends. It's a lot easier to write down a list of the things you don't want and then translate them afterwards. Well, what are the opposites of all of these things? What's the opposite of a really long commute? What's the opposite of working 40 hours a week in an office? What's the opposite of a really crap culture? What's the opposite of being stupidly underpaid and undervalued and mistreated? Well, the opposites are therefore by design what you do want more of. That might not perfectly describe exactly what you want, but it's maybe going to get you a little bit closer to understanding and writing a more exhaustive list, so that you've then got something more specific that you can go and look for. Because people with talking to me might be quite vague about, well, I want to work in a job for a company that has a really good culture. And I'll say to them, what do you mean by that? They'll say, well, friendly, supportive and growth mindset. Go on, keep going. Good culture, look it up in the dictionary, I don't know. Good company with a good culture. And then I'll say to them, well, what's the characteristics of a bad culture? And we can sit and have a 10-20 minute conversation with them listing, well, people are backstabbing, it's aggressive, it's nasty, it's cutthroat. Everybody's in it for themselves. Teams are put under massive pressure, and there's a culture of like risk aversion, and then there's a blame culture. Yada 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 yada. You can describe really easily. When you get someone going, they can describe all the negatives. Kind of like it never, doesn't end. So it can be quite useful to focus on the negatives in order to translate them into positives by inverting them. So that's all for today. I hope this has been useful to you. Do like and comment and follow my podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and by all means follow me on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. I look forward to connecting, having some conversations with you, and thank you again for your listen. It means the world to me. See you in the near future. Bye for now.
The Solo Coach Podcast.